Welcome to Is This For Real? I'm Gregory Dunn, President and CEO of Hawaii's Better Business Bureau, and I'm your host. Today we're going to be examining the topic of mediation, arbitration, a little bit more in depth. We're very fortunate in building a trusted marketplace in Hawaii to have Gerry Clay, founding partner of Clay Chapman, a local law firm, with us today to really explore mediation at its core and also talk about ways in which consumers and business owners can take advantage of mediation as an alternative to the court system. So Gerry, thank you so much for joining us.
It is my pleasure.
Absolutely. You know, before we've talked a little bit about mediation and in principle and in concept, when folks are looking at mediation as an alternative, one of the ways that they do so is they're in the middle of a dispute and they find that in the documents or in a contract it says that mediation is your first course of relief. Why are planks in contracts like that? Why would someone put a mediation clause in a contract?
Business people want to resolve their dispute without going through a terrible process of proving who's right and who's wrong. Lawsuits, litigation, and arbitration are all about proving who's right and who's wrong, and the person who's 51% right wins. The craziness is that that whole system doesn't get used. In the end, only 2.7%, I believe, are statistics that we have in Hawaii of cases that are filed end up with a final decision. The rest, party dies, party goes bankrupt. Most likely, the parties finally decide, I've had enough of this, and I'll settle.
So if we have 2.7% of cases that get a resolution, how many of those also go on to appeal?
I don't have statistics, but no, I'm talking about after all the appeals.
Oh, after the appeals get resolved.
Yeah.
So, oh my goodness sakes. So really there's a resolution that gets in truly only 2% of the cases. That's crazy.
That's what I've been arguing, isn't it? And that's our system. We have bought into it hook, line, and sinker without analyzing it.
And you're an attorney. You're a member of the bar.
Yes.
Named partner on a law.
Yes.
And it's counterintuitive for us to think that here's a person that's lived his life practicing law who's telling us there's a better way to do it.
Absolutely. I learned that in April 1984 when I was trained as a commercial mediator, and it's just like a light bulb went on. My gosh, this is so superior for business disputes. My whole practice has always been working with business people. Business people don't need to try to win. You don't do business by winning. If you do, you're going to have a very short life. You do business by finding a way to accommodate. You do business by finding the way to make both parties feel good, let's go forward. And now you find a problem that you can't really agree with each other. You just think he's wrong, he thinks you're wrong. This may be after a year, a decade, many decades. And so now you've got a dispute. Do you want to go and try to prove the other guy has no credibility in order to win? Or do you want to bring somebody in to say, let's look at the relationship and see if we can't find ways that can settle this little problem, but to a greater extent, have the ability to have that relationship reborn.
So you have that desire to do that where you have larger amounts of money at stake in a business person and two businesses. When you're talking about consumers and businesses, we're talking about really reputation management on the part of the business, because there are a finite number of customers that business can potentially engage in. And as a business owner and putting a mediation clause in your agreement with consumers or with the person you're providing the direct service to can be very beneficial for your business.
Absolutely. You don't want to go fight with your customer. I mean, if there's ever a way that he's going to be angry with you and tell the world how angry he is, it's go to court.
And it's also a lot easier in today's world to spread that message out on the internet. Every review site, dozens
Absolutely.
of them.
I mean, what you want to do is have that person say, I had a problem, but he was a gentleman. We brought in a third party. We got it resolved.
So it sounds like it's a good idea for every business to have in their service agreement or in their contract or in their bid proposal to have a mediation clause. How is a mediation clause different than an arbitration clause?
Arbitration is different from mediation. Arbitration just means I'm going to go to court, but I'm going to do it in the confines of a conference room with a man who's going to be the private judge of our dispute. Arbitration is a lawsuit, but it's confined to the parties choosing who their judge will be. And they usually equally pay that person. And he determines you're more right, you're less right. It doesn't go into what mediation does, which is, let's look at what happened. You got along for 10 years. You both made money. And now all of a sudden, you have such strong, angry feelings that you're going to be willing to destroy the person you had a relationship with. It's a bad way to go.
So let's say that you've got two parties that have a disagreement, but there may not be any contractual underpinning. Maybe it's a verbal agreement, or something that is between two people that they haven't signed a proposal. How would someone go about proposing mediation in a case like that?
Assuming you're still talking, you both say, I think we'd both benefit if we went to mediation. And we have wonderful facilities in the state of Hawaii. In Honolulu, we have a nonprofit organization called the Mediation Center of the Pacific. I've mentioned them before, where they train good business people to become good business mediators in usually smaller cases. And so you'd give them a call. If you aren't talking to them, you might ask them, is this a situation where you'd be willing to call the person that I formerly had a good relationship and see if they'd be willing to try mediation? And they'll most likely say yes.
So, we see on TV a lot of commercials from law firms saying, protect your rights. And in some cases, we've heard anecdotally, some attorneys saying, mediation, you give up rights. Maybe you can dispel that myth about that going into mediation, you give up any rights.
Well, first of all, we have to go back to the word, what are rights? I mean, the Constitution gives you certain rights. Free speech, it has nothing to do with your dispute. I mean, what are you giving up when you go to mediation? What kind of rights? People don't think in terms of analyzing these things. Nobody goes and advertises, I'm going to explain to you what your rights are. Therefore, I mean, we just have the wrong mindset, and we've bought into this. I mean, I can recall when I started law school, I had a professor who got up to tell the entering class, you're about to take a study of the adversary system. Then the key to me was, he called it, it is the pearl of the universe. My God, have we bought into this?
Well, it's fascinating because in order for an oyster to make a pearl, you have to start with an irritant.
Okay, never thought about that. But yeah, that is a...
So, and unfortunately, people see that and they want to protect their rights as they perceive it, as opposed to getting to the core of mediation, which is resolving the dispute. So,
can I stop?
Sure, go ahead.
It's beyond resolving the dispute. It's about perhaps looking at the relationship and having that become reestablished.
So that's an aha moment, because it really takes it away from arguing about a point and placing a higher value on the ongoing relationship between the two parties.
And that's what mediation does. Mediation is sometimes called interest-based bargaining. It is the job of a third party called a mediator to have both sides focus on what is in their best interest. And that may go far beyond a consumer dispute where the consumer is willing to say, I will go out and put on social media that I had a problem with you, but you are a gentleman and I will always do business and I'll recommend you. I mean, how much more is that worth to the businessman than perhaps getting the small dollars that are in dispute?
So it's focusing on the long-term gain of building a raving fan in the marketplace versus maintaining that $100 or $200 of profit that you may have made in a deal that went sideways.
That's the message we have to get out. And Greg, that is what I want to focus on for the rest of my career, is getting that message out so people begin to see. I don't have to win to be a good businessman. What I really need to do is look at the relationships that I develop and have those send people to me.
Because in doing that, you're building a trustworthy reputation in the marketplace. Trust
Absolutely.
is everything.
Absolutely.
We hear it brought up consistently that trust is important, that integrity is important. But in really distilling down what are the behaviors that are associated with those words is where you can truly succeed in the marketplace.
Absolutely. You can look at some of the issues that have come about lately, and I'm thinking about Wells Fargo. How do they reestablish trust? How do they reestablish trust after firing, what was it, 5,300 lower level employees who are carrying out the message? I mean, they really need the assistance of somebody to mediate between themselves and the consuming public. And there are professionals out there. This is not just mediation. I mean, this is the broader problem. How do I reestablish trust with my people? And that's one of the jobs of a mediator when they're in a specific dispute.
So in terms of being in a specific dispute, it's interesting to hear you talk of mediation outside of a formal setting and in more of an informal setting, in the case of the bank you mentioned and their consumers that they work with. But certainly those type of broader umbrella opportunities exist. I mean, if you had to say what would be a good pathway for a company like that to engage the services of a mediator on a broader platform, what would that look like?
Well, I'm not sure, talking about Wells Fargo, what that would look like. That's a pretty big issue, and you don't have a specific one-on-one, although there will be some cases where they will. It's a change of how you think. You don't need to win. When I saw the president, the CEO of Wells Fargo, on his interview shows, he was still talking about how I can be right. And I don't think any of his customers who felt that they were treated poorly listened to that and felt that. I mean, you've got to go into finding out what are each party's interests. What are the interests of the consumers who had all these accounts? What do they want now? That would be a far different set of negotiations than how can I pay you as little as I can for whatever hurt you had.
Which is what you get in a settlement as opposed to a mediation where it's a more collaborative discussion.
Absolutely.
You know, it's interesting to think of mediation in those terms, and if there are consumers or business owners out there who are being faced with a mediation coming up, what are some things that they may want to do to prepare in advance for the mediation? What are some tips that you have for them to think about?
Well, first and most important thing is to get a mediator who is really competent. You don't want a mediator who's solely going to focus on who might win and who might lose in this dispute. You want to get somebody who really understands the philosophy of interest-based bargaining, which is looking at both interests and finding out what can make sense to both. And that could be far different than finding out who should get the $200.
So in doing that research on the front end, finding the right mediator, then you're preparing ahead of time for the mediation. What kind of things should a consumer or a business owner start to think about for themselves?
Well, I'm not sure there is a good answer to that question. That's a very big, broad question. You don't know what a mediator is going to do, and you don't know what the most important interests of the other side are. I mean, if you want to think about what might you do, you might want to try to think about their interests. That's a pretty tough thing to do when you're really stressed and when you're upset and you're angry and you really want to kill the other guy. So I don't know that there's a good answer what you do to prepare your case and present that to the mediator, who's then going to put that together in his brew and find out how to approach both sides. He is looking for mutual gain, not trying to solve the problem.
So as we approach it from a standpoint of mutual gain, there may be things that you could bring up in mediation that may be outside of the initial dispute,
As I said a moment
opportunities.
ago,
Yeah.
wouldn't it be nice to have a disputant come back and say, I will go on social media and talk about what I think of you in good terms. You are a gentleman, you understood, you then acted on it. I mean, what's that worth? That's worth a whole lot more than the dollars in dispute.
Absolutely. It's when you think about the potential of hundreds or thousands or millions of people to see a message online like that, as opposed to simply making sure that you keep your $200 in profit, that's priceless.
And that's my message.
So what are some of the steps, let's say that people are watching this, they're intrigued with it. What are some of the resources that are out there for people to look at and find and to read about?
First place to go is BBB. BBB makes a concerted effort to focus people on mediation. And if you have a dispute with somebody, call BBB and they have professionals who are trained to tell you why and how to go forward. So that would be a first comment to any business dispute. Call the BBB. With regard to other types of disputes, can you talk to the other side and suggest, can we go to mediation? And if so, what are the facilities available? For smaller disputes, we have the Mediation Center of the Pacific. People who are wanting to do good, who came out of business relationships for the most part, or maybe they were just great parents. I mean, if you want to talk about the ultimate mediator, talk about the parents who have multiple children. I mean, and then take that same skill and apply it to business. This stuff is so simplistic that we can't really understand it. But there are techniques, there is knowledge about the industry. All these things must be brought in to come to bear to a successful outcome.
Yeah, as I recall, you recently had an article published in the Hawaii Bar Journal.
Right.
Bar Journal.
Right,
Can you
right.
tell us a little bit about the article and what you shared? And I know there were some interesting aha moments for you that came out of it that we talked about earlier in the week.
Wow, that's a very difficult question. Greg, I put down basically everything I thought about mediation, including the fact that I didn't think it was a good, when I talk about litigation, I didn't think it was going to be a good idea for people to follow. And this goes to all the lawyers in the state, this Bar Journal article. I expected there'd be a lot of discussion. And the amazing thing to me was, the article comes out, goes to 6,000, 7,000 attorneys, judges, and people in the legal system, and I got not one comment. And I don't know what to make of that, except that perhaps the audience might not have been the right one for the message. And so now I'm out there thinking, let's broaden the audience. Let's talk about the people who consume legal services, the business people. And that's why you and I chatted and said, maybe we've got a lot more in common than we thought we might have. And let's see if BBB cannot be a vehicle to get that message out, not only to all their members, but to the society. We're looking about improving society, changing from this win-lose system to one that talks about interests. You do that, society is going to benefit.
And really, well, that's at the core of everything we're trying to do as a mission-driven nonprofit organization. The Better Business Bureau is a nonprofit in the community. We're not a government agency, as many people have the misconception we are. And our mission to build trust in the marketplace and connect consumers with businesses that they can trust is one in which we know will result in people not falling victim to fraud at the same frequency that they are now. And they won't have as many problems with the businesses they do engage in. It's really an exercise in self-governance on the part of businesses and self-regulation in the marketplace. And as we look at mediation as an important part of the arsenal of tools that a business owner have at their disposal, that same arsenal is available then to consumers. It's not a one-way street. It's a tool that allows both the ability to reach an amicable resolution and maintain the relationship, because we want people to realize they have to live on the island together. They've got to continue to do business with one another. And we want to do that in a way in which we do it with aloha.
Absolutely. You know, we get caught up in mindsets, and after we get caught up in mindsets, we don't think about what it is. We just, like my law school dean, it is the pearl of the universe. Nobody analyzes. Is it really a good way for business people to go? Anybody in a relationship. I mean, the adversary system is possibly the worst design you could ever make for a divorce. You're going to prove that your spouse was bad. You're going to prove you're good. I mean, you want to talk about a way to really harm a relationship, go into the adversary system.
So this is an interesting, pivot point for us. What you're proposing is that even in disputes within a family, you could use mediation. It doesn't just have to be a business transaction relationship. You could use mediation in a divorce proceeding or some other interfamilial dispute with an inheritance or a trust issue.
Tell you about a personal experience.
Okay.
My father gave up finishing high school, although he ended up doing that at night, gave up going to college and becoming an attorney because his father asked him to take care of properties and make sure his sisters got married and made sure his brother got an education. He did that. Then the brother and one sister decided in my family that they should get an equal amount of my grandfather's inheritance, and they ended up bringing a lawsuit. It was a terrible experience as I grew up, particularly when my father had to give a deposition, and then when my mother was ready to give a deposition, and after the deposition she said, "I don't care anymore, give them what they want." My father never talked to his brother. His brother was basically dying and asked my father to come visit, and my father said, "I really don't want to." I said, "Dad, he's your brother, what?" And my father's reaction was, "He sued me." I said, "Dad, go visit him." My father went to go see his brother, and his brother, tears, crying, asked my father to forgive him. So I asked my dad, "Did you forgive him?" My father said, "Of course." They didn't talk for decades because he sued his sibling. It's a terrible system.
Wow, that's just, a heartfelt story, and it's one that when you think about it, and in the heat of the emotion of wanting to get what's mine, you run out and hire an attorney and sue. And that person that you're hiring they're given a mission, which is to get you and represent you the best way that they can. And they're
To get a win.
To get a win.
I mean, what are we trained in law schools to do? We are trained to be able to use the system to benefit our client. And the system is based on the idea that you take one party represented by a lawyer, the other one you represented by the lawyer, you bring them together in a courtroom, there is a battle, and the truth comes out. But it doesn't come out 97% of the time. You end up settling. You can't design a worse system.
It's, so in the case of your family,
Right.
if mediation had been available at the time, as opposed to litigation, as opposed to the lawsuit, there would have been several positive things that could have come out of that. I mean, what are those things that we would have articulated or expected to see out of mediation versus, the fact they didn't talk for decades?
Hopefully, the mediator would have helped his brother and his sister who sued him see what is in their best interest. Maybe my father would have ended up where my mother told him to go anyway, but he would have done it in a much different framework. It wasn't just giving up and saying it's not worth it anymore, I hate you for the rest of my life, but rather, what can we do? Maybe my father wouldn't have given as much up. I mean, there are a whole host of possibilities that could have been explored in mediation that you can't explore in a lawsuit. The lawsuit's only interested in how much should he get.
And that is something that you as the client or as one of the litigants, it's incumbent upon you to raise the flag and say, hey, I think I think mediation is important. We should try that.
And what my real goal is to have society stop thinking, sue the bastards, instead to start thinking, he's a bastard, but let's go mediate.
It's like you get, hate the sin but love the sinner kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
it's really, you have an issue, you've got a problem, but as opposed to filing a lawsuit, engaging an attorney to say, we're just going to go sue them and go full bore and see what we can get, looking at it from a more holistic approach and saying that there's a better way to do it.
And you brought up an issue. I always recommend hiring a lawyer. You cannot navigate inside the legal system because it's not made for you, it's made for lawyers. You can't understand how to navigate unless you've had legal training and legal experience. But try to keep the lawyer on focus that you really want to get this thing resolved, and to do that, bring in a good third party whose business it is to do that, called a mediator.
You bring up a really good point. I think that those people that are not used to dealing with lawyers, and whether first-time business people or consumers, engage an attorney, oftentimes they yield up a lot of control, and they don't provide that direction that says, the ultimate goal here is not necessarily to eviscerate the other person. It is to get to a point where we maintain the relationship, but we both feel good about the result and the resolution.
Yeah, it's changing the mindset we've developed, particularly here in America, of sue the bastards. I mean, we laugh about it, but you know what? It has real consequences. And we really need to start a discussion about, is there a better way to go? Not just better, wholly superior way to go. And that's mediation.
Well, Gerry, I really appreciate your taking the time to come down and spend a couple of hours with us today. This has been incredibly informative, and I know that people are going to get a lot out of it. I want to thank you for joining us today on Is This For Real? I know it's a little bit further off from the topic of fraud that we normally talk about, but when you're looking at changing trust and changing a society and culture to embrace trust in the marketplace, this is an incredibly important topic. I invite you to visit hawaii.bbb.org, where you can learn more about mediation and how to incorporate it into your business or into your contracts. For now, I wish you a hui ho, and until we meet again, this is Gregory Dunn. This has been Is This For Real? Have a great evening. Aloha.